Well, what day of the week is it?
Wednesday.
It's Wednesday.
You never
Well,
know with us when we'll jump on and do a podcast these
that's
days.
right. We're keeping people on their toes.
Yes. Obviously we didn't podcast last week because we were both at St. George, and Saturday race makes it really hard to podcast on a Friday night.
Yeah.
For me, every time we've tried it, I've been just like, I don't know, there was just too much stress.
Yeah, right. Well, and you've got this added stress of coaching other athletes,
Hmm.
and that takes some effort. I know we've talked about that, but that's not easy. The night before, making sure everyone is set, tucked in nicely, and everything, all the questions are answered. I think that's an added stress that you as an athlete need to manage. And I say stress, I don't mean that in a negative way of coaching, but it's an added thing that's on your mind, and you've got
But
to
it's
manage.
right. I think in some ways it actually helps mitigate my own stress because I'm worried about other
That's a
people
good point. Yeah,
than
yeah.
myself, and I think that's actually an okay thing.
Hmm.
Um, it's interesting. Like this was an interesting race because I think it was five athletes, five athletes racing, and and myself, and I mean that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot to kind of keep. No, it was six athletes,
Hmm.
six and myself. That's a lot, but it's an interesting thing is I'm learning more and more about because some of the athletes I've trained for a long time now, and I'm learning more and more about like what they need and what they don't need.
Hmm.
And we're still like messing around with things like how much information do you want to give an athlete, and
Yeah.
where do you want to have that information? Even an information overload
Hmm.
athletes because like I love information,
Yeah.
right? But I have some athletes that don't want much.
Well,
You
it's
just a race.
paralysis by analysis, and I think at the end of St. George 70.3, Sam Long gave his speech as the winner, and he spoke to that point that you don't always. Yes, the data is important, but at the end of the day, you still need to train. And I can't remember the exact words he used, but he was speaking to that point that sometimes it's data overload.
Yeah. So I'll just tell you, for me on this race, because I know I wasn't really like as fit as I would like to have been. I actually didn't use power
Oh, really?
and on the bike, and
Yeah,
it's really rare for me because
yeah.
I am I'm pretty in tune with the power.
Hmm.
Um, I really just went off a feel on the bike,
Yeah.
and it was interesting. I listened to that Peter Attia talk. I think you may have listened to it too, where he was interviewing the what's his name, Gustav Eden's coach, and he was saying that back when he was training a lot for time trialing, he used to just try and go as fast as basically go as fast as you could at 200 watts.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
it's actually something I've been working with some of the athletes I've been coaching, is to really start to think about how fast you're going
Hmm.
and do everything you can to go fast, because that's the idea, right? It doesn't matter how many watts you put out. If you're sitting up
Hmm.
big watts, but you're not really moving that fast. But if
Right.
you're really getting as small as you can and
Hmm.
really thinking about the course, thinking about the wind, thinking and we're really lucky at St. George because we know that course so well.
Hmm.
I know every I know every turn on that course. And then when you know it and you know the wind, you can start to play with these things. And I
Hmm.
really was concentrating on just being as fast as I could be.
Yeah.
And I was, John, the numbers are going to blow your mind. Okay, so I went 236 on the bike,
Hmm.
average power 175 watts.
That's great. That's awesome.
That's super slippery.
I didn't
And
even look at my average power.
my best ever on that course, I think, is 224, and that
Hmm.
was 2 hours and 24 minutes, and that was on like 230 watts.
Okay.
Right? But I wasn't like thinking like this. I wasn't
Yeah,
thinking
yeah. And
back
that's
then,
it.
thinking about the wattage more than being, I don't know,
And
slippery.
that is I mean, power is exponential. And so to go from 175 to 230, that is a huge difference.
Yeah.
So that in terms of just intensity of cycling. Okay, so I didn't even look at my power. I'm looking at it now because I'm the same way. I very much race by feel. Although what I'll do is I will watch power when I'm doing some hard effort, and I try to be careful not to get too deep into a hole by pushing too many watts for too long. So that's more of a there's a couple spots in the course that I was watching and I said, okay, oh, I'm up 250. I got to back off a little bit because I know that if I sustain 250 for too long of a period of time, I'll eventually, run into problems down the road. But I am looking at my normalized power was 205, which is a lot higher than I thought it would have been. I did not feel like I was doing 205. That's interesting.
What was your average? Because I gave you my average, not my normalized.
Yeah, I'm looking for my Training Peaks isn't showing my average. Why is it not showing my average
Well,
power? Oh, there it is, 187.
and my normalized was 189.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Wow. Wait, your average was 185 and your normalized?
189. Is that right? Yes,
No, that would be too flat of a course. That'd be,
I think that's what it was.
wasn't it? Wow. That's a
Yeah,
pretty even effort throughout the whole race time. That's great.
but I was pedaling on the downhills.
Yeah.
You know, once again, I was trying to be small and be efficient,
Hmm.
and I was actually really also thinking about pedaling smooth
Yeah.
because something in that interview kind of hit me that I never really thought much about.
Hmm.
But when they were talking about power in particular, like when you're pushing down on the pedal,
Right.
easily have spikes of 1,000 watts,
Hmm.
right? Even though you're only going 200 watts, like there's instantaneous spiking that occurs. And I
Yeah.
was really trying to be smooth. Now, I know we've talked about it before about like not like pulling up on your stroke, but I'm saying on the downstroke, not hitting it
Sure.
hard, like
Right. Right.
having a strong
Hmm.
uh, push through. And
Yep.
something I'm gonna look at because my pedals can actually measure that, and because I have the power meter pedals, and I want to learn more about that, about
Hmm.
how to put the force down in a more smooth manner.
Yeah.
It's kind of like ground reaction force, right? It's like you get this instantaneous spike, and we do the same in cycling. I'm sure it has a name.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. I mean, that's something that, that's a pedaling technique issue, and you're spot on with that idea. And I think it's also important for people to realize is that you got two legs. And so one of the issues with pedal technique is as you are completing a stroke with the right leg, your left leg is in a position to ready start the stroke. And so you've got to have this smooth coordination between what's happening on the right side versus the left side. And that seems easy, but that's not easy. And so I think you're right. I think if you're thinking smooth throughout the entire pedal stroke, you're probably also unweighting the right side so the left side is a little bit more effective.
Yeah, yeah, and so watts aren't always just watts, right?
Right,
If
right.
when you're spiking the watts at the 2 o'clock position,
Hmm.
it's coming off as you get to like the say 4 o'clock position. It's not the same as once in more constant watts throughout,
Hmm. Hmm.
and potentially maybe easier on your musculature and your
Hmm.
neuromuscular system. And these are just thoughts I've been having the last couple of weeks since I listened to that podcast, and it's really it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool stuff. Um, yeah. So there you go. That
Hmm.
was how I handled that, being relatively unfit and still going fast.
Well, and I think that speaks to the importance of there's different ways to race. And it is good to have some tools with you, whether that's heart rate, whether it's power, whatever. Some people watch cadence either on the bike or during the run. The form goggles are getting a little bit more popular, and having some type of pacing information during swimming, those things can all help. But at the end of the day, being able to tune into your effort, I've always valued that. I think that's such a good way to, a baseline to have is how you're feeling and how you're predicting you're going to feel in 30 minutes, in an hour, whatever it is, and trying to have that right pace that you can sustain for the entire day.
And I think part of it is, I think between you and I, the number of races we've done matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And especially races on a similar course, but still just races. Like I know the leg feeling when I'm going to be able to run off of the bike.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like when I'm on the bike at mile 40, I know what it should feel like.
Right.
I'm going to have a good run. I've had bad runs off the bike, and I've had good runs off the bike.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I've ignored that, and and had a bad run off the bike.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the dynamics of the race are such that I need to go hard, and then I regret it
Yeah.
because then you're walking. And but I think that that's something that it's really hard. Like, I'll go back to being a coach. It's really hard to, like, how do I mentor that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do I teach that to somebody? Maybe they've only done a few 70.3s,
Right.
their first 70.3. And in those cases, that's where I want them to stick to the power plan,
Mm-hmm.
or a heart rate plan, or whatever the case may be, because they don't have that feeling yet of what it should
Mm-hmm.
feel like
Mm-hmm.
to be at 80%, or whatever the case may be.
Right. No, it's good. So, during the event, during the race, you talked about trying to maintain a smooth pedal stroke and even power, and you did really well with that. Was there anywhere in the race that you had to make some decision that either positively or negatively influenced what you were doing at that time? Anything come to mind?
That's a really good question. So on the descent from Snow Canyon,
Oh yeah.
that's when the decision was made. So when I got to the top, I took my time, got a good drink, got myself completely wet,
Yeah.
and I hit the corner. I started going down, and I realized my visor wasn't on.
Oh,
It was on the top of
oh,
my head. It wasn't on my face yet. So
right.
slowed down, not really slowed down, but
Yeah.
had to mess around and get it on. And the guy went past me that I passed on the climb, and he had this basically the same bike as I did. So he made a comment to me,
Mhm.
and so he went past, and we kind of we chatted just for a second on the climb, and then he was a bigger guy. He went past me, and he's like, "Come on, let's go." And I'm like, "Okay, like I'll go with you." Like, it's a
Mhm.
big guy going downhill, and I went a little harder than I probably should have,
Mhm.
um, for like the next maybe mile and a half or 2 miles.
Mhm.
But the funny is, that little uphill,
Yeah.
um, I passed him on it, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, okay, like I weigh a little bit less." Never saw the guy again.
Yeah.
And
Huh.
did he go too hard? Like when he saw me, he's like, "Hey, let's go."
Yeah. Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
too hard, and then,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yep.
And because I fully expected when we started going downhill again, he was a bigger guy, he was going to come flying past me again,
Mhm.
but he didn't. And so maybe it was a risk I took to go a little bit harder, to be in his draft, because when you're going down those hills and you're 12 meters and you're
Drafts
going
it on
30
you.
miles
Yeah.
an hour, there's
Mhm.
I was into a headwind. There's a good draft effect,
Mhm.
a really good draft effect. But I was actually kind of sad he didn't come by me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Come by me again, because I could have used the draft. But so there was that, and then I also, like, I think that when it got steep, I was probably, Marie's not listening. That's good. I was too aggressive on
Mm.
going down the hill. I was not seeing very well.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
My
Because
my
of your head position, or
head position, and then the wind,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
my visor, I was getting wind in.
Uh.
I had allergies all week, and still
Yeah.
do. My eyes were not doing well,
Mhm.
and then I think head position too. Like, I'm not used to. I just haven't trained enough to be
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
time trial position for that long. So
Right.
I was having a hard time holding my neck up,
Mm. Mhm.
and I was like, "Man, this is dangerous," because I really
Yeah.
can't see very well.
Yeah.
I got away from it with it,
Uh,
and even on Diagonal Street, like,
yeah.
I was like, we talked the week before about, man, that's such a scary section.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't seeing well there,
Oh
and
boy.
it was kind of scary, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. And
Mhm.
I oh man, I should have went a little slower, but
Yeah.
I just couldn't.
Right. Right.
Like,
Oh,
I knew what my bike slow was going to be, and I was honestly, when at the beginning of the day, I was thinking like a 2:45 was going to be a good bike split, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be like 2:35, 2:36. I'm like, let's go.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
that's great.
but it wasn't. It was good and bad, right? Like that's the problem with racing is you get caught up in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, John, I mean, how about you? Like, was there any decisions that you made that you look back and like, oh man, like maybe that wasn't the right decision?
Yeah, no, there's a couple spots. One, the Snow Canyon, I did exactly what you did. I got to the top, and I just doused myself with water, because yeah, you worked up a little bit of heat going uphill. I knew I wanted it to get cool going down into T2, so getting myself as wet as possible. I wore a long sleeve cycling aero kit. Got all that wet, both sides, my back, my front, and went down and cooled off really nicely. And I was killing it on the downhills. My uphill was a little bit suspect, but is like we talked about when we talked about the pre-race review. You got to be careful going on that downhill. On the day of the race, there was really no wind that was coming across the road that I was worried about. And so I felt I could go, be a little bit more aggressive going downhill. And I enjoyed that part. So that was fun. But a decision I made on the run, and this was an interesting when I was talking with another athlete after the race, is I actually was walking some of those real steep uphills, even on loop one. And I did that because I knew, one, I didn't know what was going to happen with my leg, if my leg was going to hold up. And I didn't want to add the added stress of trying to run up a very short section of the course and put a lot of stress on it. And then two, physiologically, I did not want to push myself into the red zone going up that steep little hill and then work a little bit longer after that to try to recover. And so I just walked up them. I lose a little bit of time, but I think I gained time in the long run. So I think that was one of my smarter decisions on run day.
It's an interesting one, right? Because we had the same issue at Oceanside.
Hmm.
People are going to Morro Bay in a few weeks. It's the same thing there. There's a few
Yeah.
steep sections, and it always goes through my mind like, should I walk it or should I?
Hmm.
And like I've done it where at Oceanside once I walked it and then I cramped
Interesting.
at the top. I'm like, whoa, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know if that's because I walked it.
Yeah.
When I run it, I've never had that happen. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, let's just keep the run cadence, even though it's gonna be small steps, like
Hmm.
tiny, tiny steps going, rather than actually walk it. And I
Hmm.
don't know the right answers. Like, physiologically, it's probably a little harder to jog, but like because they're so short, it's almost like the heart rate doesn't even have a chance to
Hmm.
go up. And then the one in the golf course, going into the golf course, I also know that it's a nice downhill after that. Like
Hmm.
rest, and then you get to the aid station, and you can kind of just like chill on the way down. The one going to the church parking lot, though, that was a little nasty.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the first time I took that left, I I was like, oh my gosh, I wasn't ready for it to be continued to like go up.
Hmm.
The interesting thing too, I was actually going to add this. Okay, did you run the tangents in that section near the church?
Much as possible. But yeah, it was, I actually ended up cutting off another pro athlete by accident because I was running the tangent, and she came up on me faster than I had expected. So there was that quick U-turn before going back through the tunnel. And I certainly, took the inside corner, and all of a sudden she was on my shoulder, and she was nice enough about it. It wasn't intentional. And
So to me, it was really interesting the amount of people that weren't running the tangents,
hmm.
and and some relatively fast people. So when you took the left, when you're on the bike path and you go on the road down to the church before the U-turn,
Hmm.
everyone ran on the left hand side of the road.
Hmm.
I ran on the right hand side.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only person.
Hmm.
And then going into the church parking lot, um, I went right to the I went to the right of the so I went up the steep hill and then to the right of the parking lot. Everyone went to the left,
Mm-hmm.
ran straight, right?
Right, right.
Why are all these people doing this? And there's a few other spots on the course that people were not doing this. And you'd think at this point in, like, if you can do a 70.3 at the speeds that we're doing it,
Right.
that people would be running the tangents. And it's just,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
had
I'm
no
pretty sure I stayed on the left side of the double yellow, even on the run there. Yeah, yeah,
there's no rule that says you have to. The road was
yeah,
closed.
yeah,
Right? So
yeah.
I don't know. It's funny, right? Like everywhere else on the swim, well, you got to go buoy to buoy, be as short as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I want to stick to the left because that's what our brain says to.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Well, and so, then for me, it was nice. I really was patient with both the bike and the run. And so the last couple of miles when it was all downhill on the run, I was able to, push it a bit more, and I felt really good about that. I crossed the finish line. I could not have gone faster on that day. That's what I had in me, and I was really, really quite pleased with that. But it was nice to be able to pick up the pace in that last couple of miles. So it was good.
I did the same thing. I negatively split the race.
Mm,
That was my goal. Like
hmm.
it's funny. I was talking to people the day before. I told them my goal on the run, especially in the beginning, was run as long as I could, as slow as I could.
Right, right.
And because I've been there at mile 10, even on this course where it's downhill, and I couldn't run fast because my legs were just done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went very, very conservative in the first lap. And then even this first half of the second lap until we got to the downhill. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to, for me, run faster. And I was able to. Not that I wasn't hurting, like I was hurting for sure.
Right.
But I think that on that course in particular, negatively splitting it is the way to do that. It's not easy. Like you have to have a plan going into it for sure.
Yeah. So it's interesting. After, no, it was before the race. I was talking with another athlete, and a segue to the other topic we were going to talk about. And we were talking about nutrition, and uh, something came up, and I said, something that really bothers me. I've done a lot of reading on nutrition. I've done a lot of listening to different podcasts and what have you. And people just always fall back on the advice, well, you just need to figure out how many calories you can take in, or how to train. You just need to train your gut. And they say it almost as if it's an obvious thing to know how to do this. And I just, sort of, was very critical of people saying that because it's too easy. It's too easy of an answer to say, you just need to figure out how many calories you can take in during a 70.3 or during an Ironman. I'm like, well, what are you actually trying to pay attention to that allows you to make that determination that this is the right amount of calories that I can take in, and if I take in any more, it's not going to matter. It's just a funny thing. So you and I got talking about this, and you've actually looked up some information on this.
Well, and I love the fact that what you just said, like, oh, you got to figure it out.
Hmm.
The problem is I don't think you can ever figure it out
Right.
because I think that the environmental conditions play too big of a role, right? And we've talked about this before, just about like trying to bring in different sources, like gels versus drinks versus whatever. But just as you were talking, I'm like, okay, my race finished and your race finished. Actually, it's funny, we finished almost the exact same time, right? Like
Hmm.
you were still in the finish area when I finished.
Right.
The temperature on the run, what did it get to? 77, 78?
I didn't even check, but yeah,
Well, there's people I coach that they finished in was 90.
hmm.
So their nutrition strategy is different, and the amount of carbohydrates you can bring in changes as the temperature increases.
Right.
Right? So you're right. Like, to just figure it out is almost impossible. Just
Hmm.
and one of the things that we were talking about before we got on is this idea of training your gut. And the first thing when you look up training your gut is, okay, you should be teaching your body to take in more carbohydrates, and not just take them in, but also utilize them.
Hmm.
And okay, well, how do we do that? Well, the first thing it says is, well, train this at race intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I really have a hard time. Let's say I was coaching you, John, for your Ironman, right? Telling you, okay, on hour 8, you've been training at this intensity, your race intensity, for 8 hours. This is what you should be doing.
Right, right.
You're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we talk, take something that's like doing like maybe a 12-hour race, a 13-hour race, it's next to impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we take it to a half Ironman, I don't do a 4.5 hour to 5.5 hour training day at that intensity,
Right.
nor would I prescribe it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's too hard on the body to do. So what is my stomach gonna do at hour 4 and 5?
Mm-hmm. Well, and to complicate it even more, for a race day event is if you are relying on aid stations to pick up any type of, whether it's fluid or fuel, you've got to recognize that on race day, the bottle you pick up may not be cold. It may not have come from the refrigerator. It may not have been iced, and all of a sudden you've got a warm bottle of whatever drink it is, and everything sort of changes when the fluid temperature. That fluid temperature actually does influence how quickly the fluid leaves the gut or the stomach, gastric emptying. Uh, but it also influences things like taste and palatability, and so there, how do you replicate that? I guess you leave your bottles out in the sun during your training session and refill that way, but we don't do that. It's not as easy as a lot of podcasters seem to make it.
It's interesting too when you look at, without even thinking about the environmental variables, because environment matters.
Mm-hmm.
You look at percentage of VO2 max and the amount of fluid you can bring, just fluid, just water, it significantly decreases the higher you go.
Mm-hmm.
The studies I've read were like maybe like you might be to 10 to 15% of what you would have just at rest,
Mm-hmm.
just bringing water in. But there's also the carbohydrate, bring the carbohydrate in. One source I got said that at 80 to 90% of VO2 max, which is 80% is pretty close to what a lot of people do their half Ironman at, 35 to 50% decrease in the amount of absorbed
Mm-hmm.
carbohydrates. So if you're training at 60 to 70, which a lot of people, that's kind of like their zone 2, at that point it's 5 to 10% decrease.
Right.
So you train this at that level and you're throwing all these carbohydrates and okay, it's working. When you increase, it might not work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So John, let's actually just talk about St. George, and let's talk about you and what you were able to bring in on the bike and on the run. Obviously, you weren't eating on the swim. I'm assuming.
Yeah. No, I wasn't. Yeah, I got out, and my plan on a 70.3 is I get out and I use a bottle of Gatorade mixture. I use 3 scoops per bottle, and I start working on that liquid hydration with some carbohydrate in it. And then by mile 20, I like to take in some more solid type of food, and I actually eat rice. So I've got cooked rice, and I pour a bunch of salt in that. I put it in a baggie, and I have it. And right around 20, sometimes 15 miles, 20 miles, depending on how I'm feeling, I'll start eating that rice. And it's basically a big log of rice that I have, and I do 1 bag per the 56 miles, and I'll munch on that through about mile 40. I try to have it done, and along the way, I end up doing 2 bottles of that Gatorade mixture, 1 per hour, and then at that point, all water.
And then what about the run?
The run, I do not have. I don't take in really much fuel at all. I should say, along on the bike ride, I will grab maybe 1 or 2 Mortons along the way near the last third of the course, depending on how the aid stations are laid out. So at St. George, I grabbed at least one Morton each time and was able to take that as well. And depending on the run and the conditions, I'm prepared to be able to use a Morton on the run. That seems to be okay for me, but I really do rely pretty much on water at that point. I try to really make sure that I've got the right calories coming off. Here I am saying it. I try to make sure that I feel fueled by the time I'm off the bike, and then I really focus on water. And near the end of the run, if I'm brave enough, I'll reach for some Coke and try to take some Coke or Pepsi or whatever it is that they have.
What do you mean by brave enough? Like, what's the negative?
What's that?
What, I love the fact you said brave enough, but what's the downside?
Well, I've had a lot of problems with GI problems during endurance races, and to the point where I'm throwing up on the run because I've taken too much, or I've taken too little, or I've drank too much, or drank too little. There's no solid answer for it, but I have a history of really getting nauseous on the run and having to stop and throw up, and it's not a pleasant experience. And so sometimes I would get that way if I was taking in some carbohydrate. Then all of a sudden it was, something that would cause me to throw up. But fortunately, in the last 4 or 5 races following this race, and I also do a lot of salt. I've been able to sort of control that nauseousness, and but I am very careful about what I do take in on the run because I don't want to tip the scales in the wrong direction.
I think that that's so good, and if you think about it, like, and John, I've known you a long time, and I've known that you've been dealing with
Mhm.
the throwing up issue,
Mhm.
and for you, obviously, that's working.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: do you practice this outside of races?
Um, no.
Well, no, but here's the thing:
No,
is I want that honest answer, right?
no.
Because now, fortunately for and our listeners probably know this, you race a lot,
Yeah, that's my
so
that's my
that's your
testing ground, right? Because I have a hard time. I don't train like I race, and so whatever I can do on training days, I have tried to replicate that in racing, and it doesn't work because my training and racing, there are different intensities. And so I used to try to practice eating whatever I would eat on a race, but it would never translate.
and I think that's important to
No.
know. It's kind of what we're getting at here is triathlon is kind of special in that
Yeah.
we have these races that are significantly longer than our training.
Hmm.
And if they're not longer, they're different intensities, right? So,
Hmm.
like, I'll go for a 5 hour bike ride, but I'm not going for a 5 hour bike ride at 85% of my
Right.
FTP.
Right.
I'm going to do it at 75% or
Hmm.
70%. And so, what I do there is not going to work when it's at a higher intensity. Um, the other thing and I'll just speak for me, like, I sometimes will have a really hard time eating on the bike or drinking on the bike in the
Oh,
beginning,
interesting.
coming
Yeah,
out of
in the beginning. Yeah, yeah.
And so I've actually started to do a gel. I do a gel right before I go in the water,
Okay.
like 5 minutes before.
Hmm.
I do a gel as I'm running between the swim and my bike,
Hmm.
and I'm able to do that. I'm able to do that, but
Okay.
as I get pedaling, and maybe it's the position or
Yeah.
whatever, like, I can go the first hour if I don't force it without really drinking or eating,
Hmm.
and I'd be happy, right? Like,
Mm.
because and I start forcing, I do start forcing calories because I know I need to, not because I want to.
Right.
And but there's sometimes, like, I can't get in what I want, um, and it's frustrating because, like, I want to bring in more calories, but my constitution is,
Hmm.
I just can't.
Yeah.
And I've never thrown up in a race, but I've had GI distress, but
Hmm.
I've never thrown up. But it gets to a point where it's like I feel like I feel like I'm gonna throw up if I eat more. Like, I'm
Yeah.
full. You know what I mean? Like, it's like the gastric emptying is not happening,
Hmm.
and I don't know if that's because you know, my heart rate is maybe a little higher than I'd like it during the swim because I work maybe a little bit too hard in the.
Hmm.
or I work a little bit too hard on the bike. I don't know what it is, but but even in training, like I really like the first hour on the bike, I kind of have to force myself
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
eat or drink. Um, so this race, to be honest with you, I got off the bike and I was so thirsty.
Oh, really?
And
Yeah.
I don't know if that was because of the last 10, 12 miles you really can't drink.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like I was telling you, like I couldn't barely, I was having trouble seeing.
Right,
So
right.
I'm definitely
Yeah.
not drinking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely not drinking going down diagonal.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually purposely slowed down significantly on several aid stations, even walked a few, which I rarely ever do,
Mm-hmm.
just to get in water.
Yeah.
And I think it was a smart decision. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you get to that point in a race where you're thirsty or hungry, then it's time to say, hey, this next aid station, take your time.
Got to pay attention. Yeah.
Pay attention, no matter how fast you want to go.
Yeah.
Um, you know, that being said, I don't do anything at the last aid station, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, there's nothing getting in me in the last 5 minutes,
No,
so I'm
that's your
no
your
sense.
fate is sealed at that point.
The only thing I did the last aid station, there was someone like basically put a water right in my hand, and I just took it through over my head,
Yeah, yeah.
pull me down for that last the
All
last.
right. All right.
But I think that that's an important part of racing, because I gotta be honest with you, most races are different for me, and
Mm-hmm.
the feeling is different.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking back because I'm getting a few athletes ready for Morro Bay, and you're out of the water and it's 47 degrees, and the
Yeah.
water's
Great.
honestly, John, the last thing you want to do when you're shivering is drink
Yeah.
or even eat. Like
Mm-hmm.
I wore gloves the entire race. Like it's harder to eat, and you don't feel like eating when you're really really cold.
Right.
And that was
Or
another
drinking. Yeah.
race. I think I had 7 Mortons on the run
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't eat much.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so sometimes you have to like kind of roll with it and just be smart uh, about it rather than like thinking about all the training in my gut. It doesn't matter how trained your gut is if your brain is like it's too cold
Yeah.
or too hot.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably felt that in really hot races too, right? Like where you don't want to eat. You could
Right.
drink
Right.
water, but you don't want to eat.
Yeah. Well, because once you're eating, you're increasing digestive system, which is generating more heat. But it's interesting as you talk about this. You know, I remember during the race, you have that out and back before Snow Canyon, and everything's going fine. I felt like I was on track, and you start going up Snow Canyon, and all of a sudden you realize you're sweating a lot. there's there's a lot of fluid being lost, and all of a sudden I was thinking, wait, am I really keeping up with my fluid loss? I checked my bottles, where I was at, and yeah, that was an eye opener because a lot of times racing in this dry weather that we have here in the Southwest, you may not realize how much you're actually sweating, and it sometimes that perception of how much perspiration you're having is lost. But yeah, going up Snow Canyon with a little bit of a tailwind, that sweat was pouring out.
I'm glad to take my visor off
Yeah,
because I was having vision problems already.
yeah,
It would have just been salt throughout the entire.
right, right.
So, John, I love the fact that you said you do a Gatorade mixture of 3 scoops. That's
Hmm.
strong.
Yeah, it is. Hmm.
And one of the things in what I was reading was talking about like in training your gut, was it not just training your gut, but training your taste.
Hmm.
Like for me, 3 scoops of Gatorade, I don't know if I could
Right,
take it.
right.
But over time, you could build it up, and that's
Hmm.
like take your on your training day, especially leading into a race, maybe a month before, start going stronger and stronger and stronger,
Hmm.
so you can actually ingest more from your drink. Did you do that to get to 3 scoops, or is that something you're okay doing?
It was a little bit of trying it from race to race, and I wanted to try to get a little bit more in, and so that was my solution. Is I did 2 scoops one race. I said, okay, that worked well, and I would try 3 scoops the next race, and that worked well. But I do know that what I do is that my front hydration is always just 100% water. I don't mix that with anything. And so if I am going along and I feel it's too concentrated for the conditions, I'll take a sip and then I'll immediately take in some water at the same time, and that way trying to dilute it on the fly at that point.
Okay, so yeah, that makes sense though to do
Mm.
that. Um, I actually tried something different that I've never tried before. I gotta tell you this one.
All
So you
right.
know what boba is?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Little bubble things.
yeah.
So I made a boba. I'm calling it that. I should coin this a Morton boba.
Okay.
So I took a Morton gel and put it in my front hydration with my
Uh-huh.
Gatorade.
Ah, interesting.
And I was like, well, because the Morton has basically no taste to it. Because my thing
Yeah,
is, if I put too many scoops of Gatorade, I can't handle the taste.
yeah, yeah.
So I had a Gatorade Endurance. Probably it was like whatever, 1.5 scoops, and then I put a Morton in. And then as I was drinking, I'm like getting a little bit of that
Oh,
Morton.
cool.
I was like, this is like a boba. Okay, like
Yeah, yeah,
I'm gonna do this again because I was able to get more calories in
yeah.
with strong taste.
Nice.
So we're gonna call it the Ted Boba.
Oh, that's right. And see, what I love about what we're talking about is if anyone else tries to replicate what you do or what I do, it probably isn't right for them. But what I think is important is to have the ability to make decisions in terms of what hydration, what fuel to get in. And this is what's always frustrating about some of the advice that you read or hear is sometimes it's like, well, you got to have a plan and you got to stick to the plan. And I think, yes, to a certain extent, but you also need to know when to change the plan. And there's a lot of there's a lot of factors that will influence what your hydration plan is as you go along. Yes, have a plan. I've done it without no plan and it's not good. I've done it with a plan, it's not good. You need to make smart decisions as you go along.
The thing that kind of bothered me this race, and this is the first race I've done since 2014, maybe that didn't have Red Bull on the course.
Oh, interesting. You use Red Bull.
I
Yeah.
do, especially on the second half of the run.
Oh, okay.
For like, I probably don't even get like a full can and like the little bits they give you. More for the taste difference.
Yeah, yeah.
Never drink Red Bull anytime except for
Ah,
in a 70.3 or an Ironman, and that was just like the thing. It's like, okay, it's a different flavor. It
mm-hmm.
kind of Gatorated out by then, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm upset that Gatorade or Red Bull is no longer on course. So
Mm.
if maybe they can get together again. Yeah, that was that was one of the downers. I was actually thinking maybe for like my next race I'd get a flask or something and just put Red Bull in it. Just
Yeah,
a really different taste.
yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and that's interesting you say that because I think both you and I you and I have the perspective of we should not be 100% reliant on the aid stations because you don't know if something's going to get missed or all of a sudden the aid station changes a flavor or changes the entire drink uh, you know uh, changes a whole new type of drink. I do think it's great to have all the aid stations, but at the same time you've got to think about how to be self-sufficient as you go along for the most part and supplement.
The other thing I think people put too much stock in is, oh well, what's going to be on the course? I got to get used to it. No, you don't.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like sugar, right? Like
Hmm. Hmm.
um, that one always I thought was weird that people were always concerned about that. And
Hmm.
the other one we should probably talk about since we're talking about this is Mortal.
Yeah, I haven't not tried it yet, other than walking through the expo and I took a sip, but
So it's fine.
yeah.
Uh, but this is a really interesting one
Hmm.
because it doesn't really have very many calories. And if you're looking for calories in a sports drink, that's not the answer.
Right.
This has been on Slow Twitch, and people are complaining about it.
Hmm.
Um, to me, like I'm glad that the race still had Gatorade
Hmm.
and has gels and things like that. Um, but I think that this is an interesting dynamic that's changed with this new brand. Um, I don't know. It's like almost calorie-free drinks on 70.3 seems odd.
Yeah. Well, see, but here's where I guess I'm lucky is I don't. I don't rely on the bike aid stations at all for calories from whatever drink it is, because you don't know what the concentration you're going to get if they're mixing it on course, or sometimes they're handing bottles out. It all depends on the race, and so yeah, it didn't influence me at all. But I didn't take Mortal, nor did I take Gatorade as I went along.
There's a lot of people that do,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
once again, John, like you and I are relatively fast, or you're talking about 7, 8 hour people, they can't bring enough,
Yeah, that's true.
right?
Hmm.
And they have to, like, that's a little bit of a
That's a
difference.
great point. Yeah.
And in a full Ironman, especially, you're talking like, the 17, 18 hour person,
Hmm.
there's no possibility of them
Yeah.
bringing, like, they have to rely on that.
Hmm.
Seems like an odd sponsor to me.
Hmm.
And I think that they should do a better job of explaining that it doesn't have calories or has minimal calories, because
Right.
the
I
average
think,
person probably know that.
yeah, and I think one of the last pictures I saw was they want whoever they is to fuel or to hydrate with Mortal and fuel with Morton. I think
Okay.
that's the combination that that they're advertising as trying to hit, which that makes a lot of sense. Um,
Yeah. Not electrolytes in Morton.
I don't think so.
Good
No,
question. I haven't looked, to be honest with you.
yeah, Mortal would be the electrolytes, and I really think that I don't think Morton has much in electro. I mean, obviously they got the caffeinated and non-caffeinated one.
Because I was, getting my, I get my electrolyte through the Gatorade Endurance, which I
Hmm.
understand is going away. The
Yeah,
Gatorade is no longer
yeah,
going to be a thing. But hey, John, don't tell anybody, but I got 16 tubs of it upstairs.
yeah. All right. Yeah.
There was this unbelievable clearance sale, one of the
Hmm.
sites. I got 12 tubs of Gatorade Endurance, the flavor that I like. I think I paid $40 for 12 tubs
Wow, that's great.
shipped.
Yeah, I know because it does get expensive buying this stuff. So.
And 12 tubs of Gatorade Endurance is going to last me a long time,
Hmm. Hmm.
or however many I've got.
Mm.
So, nobody reach out to me, okay? And
Yeah. So we're we're almost out of time. I don't have the time clock on the live stream anymore. So
50.
oh, okay. So something that I think is important with the hydration, because this is what we've talked about, is it's not always easy to train like you race, is writing down everything you did after the race. And as soon as you can, write down what you took in before the race, what you took in during the race, and afterwards as well, uh, because that's how you start learning what decisions that you can make that may be helpful, or what your range of decisions actually are. Uh, and I always say write it down as soon as you can after the race, because a week after you're forgetting. Even as I explained in it here, I forgot that. Well, yeah, no, I take salt along the way, and so our memories are not very good on dietary recall.
No, no, not at all. And honestly, like, I don't write down what I took during the race, because once again, it's too variable.
Hmm.
I have goals. Like, I do have goals of how many calories I want to get, but I've
Hmm.
never seemed to get it.
Yeah.
And but I do know, and I actually don't even write down the day before anymore, because I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mess up. Like, the day before is the same thing now.
Hmm.
Breakfast is the same, and so I don't leave anything to chance. But I was writing it down for a long
Yeah,
time.
that's right. You got to that spot by paying attention to it. Yeah.
And so now, like, I actually haven't had like any GI issues in the last few years, ever since
Hmm.
I kind of this mixed one thing that I have. And you're right, though, if you're struggling, like with diarrhea or even constipation or any other GI issues, my number one advice to people is next time try something completely different.
Hmm.
Like, and once again, people are like, oh, well, they say you should have this. It's not working for you. Who cares
Right.
what people say, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think I've probably said on the podcast what my pre-race meal is, and it's changed. But I'll just tell you this funny story, because it is funny. So the night before the race, we at our condo and we went to the hot tub. I'm like, yeah, this sounds like fun. Relax me.
Hmm.
went to bed, and these people were in there, and there were mountain bikers, and they were just fascinated by like what we were doing tomorrow.
Mhm.
You know, they want to ask me all these questions, and like, okay, I gotta ask you, what'd you have for dinner? And I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell them because it's kind of like weird, but I have like an 8 ounce hamburger patty and instant mashed potatoes.
Mhm.
So like, I say this, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like that's exactly what we had for dinner.
Mhm.
We had meatloaf and and instant mashed potatoes." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, so it's not that it's not that strange."
Right.
But like once again, for me, it works. But it was more like, "Oh my gosh, these people are gonna think I'm so weird that that's what
Oh, I
that's."
love it. I love it. Well, that just made me think of the story Paula Newbert Fraser told about pre-race meal. Someone asked her after she won one of her Ironmans, uh, what was her pre-race meal? What's the secret sauce? And she goes, "Well, I had pizza, so I guess it would be that." But it wasn't something that she was purposely even planning on, and so it was really interesting.
Yeah. So, but once again, I used to have diarrhea issues uh, in 70.3s, especially on the run, but I don't have them anymore.
Yeah,
And
right, right.
I mean, my other big secret is really limiting the fiber about a day and a half before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and I know like the mashed potatoes, they've got the instant mashed potatoes don't have much
Right, right.
on the broken dough.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean and this is why it's complicated to figure out a race day nutrition plan because it's the 2 to 3 days before the race that you need to be really careful in terms of what you're eating, and then how that race day nutrition will work may be dependent on your pre-race meal. And this is why if you are struggling with a nutrition plan or a hydration plan, write everything down every time you do a race, and then write down how your race went, and you can start trying to narrow down the choices that may be working against you or that may be working for you.
Great. Awesome. So, John, can we train our gut?
Well, if I could eat more carbohydrates and more sweets, that would be a good thing. So
Oh, like that's I'm starting to think. Like, well, maybe if I could have more jelly beans on my rides,
yeah.
it'd be happier. Maybe not my dentist, but it would make me happier.
Well, and see, here's the conflicting advice that we're still hit with is we, train the gut, uh, but then also there's, some contemporary thinking about, you know, train high, race low, or whichever way, or, train with low carbohydrate and then race on carbohydrate. And that throws out the advice of train your gut right out the window because you're not training your gut if you're trying to train on one fuel type, maybe fats more so, and then racing on carbohydrates. That speaks exactly against that type of advice. So,
I'm 180 on that. Like, I don't believe in the fasted training at all.
no. Hmm.
Just, and I've tried it. I train and race so much better when I'm
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. I've done a ton of listening to podcasts on this and reading on it, and
Yeah.
when you really get into like deep into the mitochondrial physiology,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to it doesn't seem to work. Um,
Hmm.
unless you've completely went the whole way, and you've spent months of going low carb,
Right.
um, but just to do it on and off doesn't seem to me to be.
Hmm. And there are health reasons to do one type of diet or another. Uh, but it is, and if you can use fat as a fuel, that makes a lot of sense physiologically. But it does really matter what type of intensity you are doing a race and whether or not you can get the calories converted from a chemical state to a mechanical state as quickly as possible. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is trying to get that fuel, whatever the fuel is, converted over to the ability to generate a force.
And I would also say, and this is getting a little bit deeper, but I'd also say that if you knew your calories were going to be limited on the
Hmm.
race, not just not able to get calories. Let's say you're doing an ultra endurance race and the next aid station is 20 miles away.
Right.
And that might be a thing. But for us in the racing we're doing on the bike, we can basically have unlimited fuel.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the run, like most of these races, it's every mile you have
Mm-hmm.
to get fuel.
Yeah.
So it's, you have a limiter of how much you can bring in, but you can still
Mm-hmm.
bring in enough,
Right. Right.
to maintain a decent level of blood sugar. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's my thoughts are. I think that it's in triathlon, it's played out and it's kind of proven that it doesn't really.
Yeah. It's such a tough topic. It's tough to nail down the right plan because there's so many things that influence it. But this was fun to chat about what we've done. It's a bit anecdotal information, but at the same time, we've done a lot of reading and tried different things. But it is interesting. Both of us have read up on this a lot, and our nutrition plans look a little bit different. And I think that's that individual nature of these events is you do really need to pay attention to how things are working for you as an athlete, to be able to narrow down what works and what doesn't work or what's too risky.
I think you and I are closer than you think, though,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
because you and I are both we're forcing carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
Forcing,
You're probably right. We're probably similar up until the run. I think you do more fueling on the run than I do.
only, but the funny thing is, like, I only fuel with gels on the
Yeah.
run.
Yeah.
I don't drink any. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
just I drink water.
Mm.
And um I think this race, I think I had 5 Mortons on the run.
Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of like every third aid station.
Mm-hmm.
There were times when once again, didn't feel like I needed it. Didn't feel like I listen to my body. I've raced enough to kind of know, like, when I'm starting to feel, that little down, then give myself some.
I don't know the way you downed that pizza after the race.
Other thing is, I didn't even finish the pizza.
You were not sharing that pizza.
Like, you want to know the ironic thing is, after the roll down, everybody ate it. So you get pizzas and everyone at the table. I was just sitting there the entire time. I took 3 or 4 bites out of it, and like, you guys can have it.
Oh, I love it. I love racing St. George. It's such a great event. It was so great to do that with you there and all our other friends and local athletes. And a lot of people coming up and supporting, which is no joke. Trying to track number of people, that's hard work. And so, thank you to everyone who is out there volunteering, cheering people on. It really does matter. It makes the race. It gives a really neat atmosphere to the race and really enjoyable.
Awesome. All right, John. Hey, have a good night, and we will hopefully be back at this maybe next week. We'll see. You never know with us.
All right, sounds good. Talk soon.